There are moments in life that split your reality in two, before and after. Moments where you realize that the world you thought you understood operates by rules you never knew existed. For me, that moment came when my 6-year-old niece looked me in the eyes and told me I'd already been in her room, when I knew with absolute certainty that I hadn't moved from the couch. I was 21, and my sister had asked me to watch Emma and Lucas overnight, while she and her husband attended a wedding a few hours away. This wasn't unusual. I'd babysat my niece and nephew dozens of times before. Emma was 6, quiet and sensitive, the kind of kid who noticed things others missed. Lucas was 9, more talkative, but equally easy to manage. I knew their routines, knew their house, knew how to handle bedtime anxieties and midnight bathroom trips. This should have been the easiest night of my life. My sister's house sat in a quiet suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where people still leave their porch lights on for trick-or-treaters and kids ride bikes until dark. Normal. Safe. The kind of environment where nothing bad ever happens. Their home was a standard 2-story with the kids' bedrooms upstairs, across the hall from each other with a bathroom in between. A balcony overlooked the living room downstairs, creating an open, airy feeling that made the house feel larger than it was. Before leaving, my sister walked me through the routine with the casual confidence of someone who'd done this 100 times. Leftover Chinese food for dinner, no scary shows, bed by 9. Emma sometimes gets nervous at night and might call for me once or twice. Standard stuff. Nothing that raised any red flags. The evening started perfectly. We ate dinner in the living room, watched a movie, laughed at the funny parts. The kind of normal, peaceful evening that makes you forget the world can be dangerous. Around 9 o'clock, I took them upstairs and tucked them in. Emma asked me to leave her door open a little and keep the hallway light on. Lucas was asleep almost before I finished saying goodnight. I went back downstairs, turned on the TV with the volume low, and settled into the couch. The house was quiet, comfortable. I scrolled through my phone, half watching whatever was on the screen, completely relaxed. That lasted exactly 30 minutes. I heard footsteps upstairs, soft but distinct. I figured Emma needed something, a glass of water or reassurance about a noise. I started up the stairs, but before I reached the halfway point, I saw her, standing on the balcony that overlooked the living room, looking down at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle. Her response made the air in the room feel suddenly cold. "You already came to my room," she said simply, matter-of-factly, like she was telling me about something that had just happened. I stopped on the stairs. "Emma, I haven't been upstairs since I tucked you in." She looked at me like I was the one confused. "You were just there. You stood in my doorway and whispered that everything was fine." And that's when I felt it for the first time. That wrongness. That sense that something fundamental about reality had shifted, that the rules I'd always relied on no longer applied. Because I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had not left the couch. I walked Emma back to her room, keeping my voice calm and rational, falling back on the standard explanations adults use to comfort children. "You were dreaming," I told her. "Sometimes dreams feel so real we think they actually happened. It's completely normal. Nothing to be scared of." I checked her closet, made a show of looking under the bed, even though I knew nothing would be there. The room was exactly as it should be. Her stuffed animals arranged on her shelf, her nightlight casting a soft glow, everything normal and safe. She settled back into bed, but as I left the room, I felt her eyes on me. Not the sleepy gaze of a child ready to drift off, but something more alert, watchful. Like she was trying to reconcile two contradictory truths, trying to make sense of something that didn't add up. I went back downstairs telling myself it was nothing. Kids mix dreams with reality all the time. Their imaginations are vivid, their boundaries between sleeping and waking more fluid than adults. It didn't mean anything, but my heart was beating a little faster than it should have been. 20 minutes passed. The house was silent again. I tried to focus on the TV, but I found myself listening instead, straining to hear any sound from upstairs, any indication that something was wrong. Then I heard movement on the stairs. Lucas appeared, rubbing his eyes, his hair sticking up in that way it does when kids first wake up. He walked into the living room and stood by the couch, looking at me with an expression that mirrored his sister's. Confused. Uncertain. "Why did you come into my room?" he asked. Every nerve in my body went cold. Not the sudden jolt of fear, but a slow, creeping chill that started at the base of my spine and spread outward. Because this was different. This wasn't just Emma's imagination. This was two separate children, in two separate rooms, telling me the same impossible thing. "I didn't," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I've been down here the whole time." He shook his head slowly. "You stood by my dresser and looked at me. Then you walked out without saying anything." I wanted to argue, wanted to insist he'd been dreaming, that his sister's story had somehow influenced him, that there was a rational explanation. But the way he said it, the specific details, the certainty in his voice, it didn't sound like a dream. It sounded like something that had actually happened. "You must have been half asleep," I said, but the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. Lucas didn't go back to bed. He climbed onto the couch next to me, and I didn't argue. Part of me didn't want to be alone either. Didn't want him upstairs in his room where something I couldn't explain might visit him again. That's when I started really listening to the house. I turned off the TV, and in the sudden silence, every small sound became amplified. The refrigerator's hum from the kitchen, the settling of floorboards, the wind brushing against the windows, and underneath it all, a feeling. That stretched, wrong feeling that something was fundamentally not right. Lucas noticed me listening, saw the tension in my posture, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to the first stirrings of real fear. Kids are perceptive. They pick up on adult anxiety like a contagion. "Is everything okay?" he asked quietly. I was about to reassure him, to lie and say everything was fine, when I heard it. Light footsteps running upstairs. Fast, urgent. Then Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, racing across the balcony, running down the steps, while screaming my name over and over. Emma hit the bottom of the stairs and ran into the living room, tears streaming down her face. Not the manufactured tears of a tantrum or manipulation, but genuine fear. The kind of crying that comes from deep, primal terror. "What's wrong?" I asked, already on my feet, already feeling my heart rate spike. "There's someone upstairs," she sobbed. This wasn't imagination. This wasn't a dream bleeding into waking. My niece was terrified. Lucas was looking at her with wide eyes. And every instinct I had was screaming that something was very, very wrong. "Why do you think someone's upstairs?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm for their sake, even as panic started clawing at my throat. "Someone came in my room again and said goodnight, but it didn't sound like you." It didn't sound like you. Those words hit me like ice water. Because up until that moment, I'd been trying to rationalize this, trying to find a logical explanation. But Emma wasn't saying she saw me. She was saying she saw something that looked like me but wasn't quite right. Something that was close but not close enough. Something that was trying to imitate me but failing in some subtle, fundamental way. I looked at both kids, saw the genuine fear in their faces, and made a decision. I couldn't keep telling them it was their imagination. I couldn't keep pretending this was normal. Something was happening, and whether it was an intruder or something I couldn't explain, I needed a check. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice as steady as possible. "I want you both to stay down here on the couch. Don't move. I'm going to go upstairs and check everything out, and I'll be right back." Emma's crying intensified. Lucas grabbed her hand. "It's okay," I said, with more confidence than I felt. "I'm just going to make sure everything's safe." But I wasn't going up there defenseless. I walked to the kitchen, trying to look casual, trying not to alarm the kids further. I opened the knife drawer and selected the largest knife I could find. Not a steak knife, but a proper chef's knife with a blade that caught the kitchen light as I pulled it out. I held it low against my leg as I walked back through the living room. The kids were huddled together on the couch, watching me with expressions that were equal parts fear and trust. They believed I could handle this. They believed I would keep them safe. I started up the stairs, the knife now held in front of me, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. As I reached the balcony that overlooked the living room, I tried to lighten the mood, did a silly little march to make them laugh. Neither of them smiled. I moved past the balcony into the upstairs hallway. The lights were on, just as I'd left them. Emma's door was open a crack, just as I'd left it. Lucas's door was slightly ajar. The bathroom door was open dark inside. Everything looked normal. And then I heard it. A sound from Emma's room. Not a settling noise. Not the house creaking. Something moving. Something breathing. I approached Emma's door slowly, every muscle in my body tense, ready to run or fight or both. I peered inside, squinting into the dimness, trying to make sense of the shapes and shadows. There was something there. Someone. I said hello quietly, not wanting to alarm the kids downstairs, not really expecting a response. But someone answered. The voice that came out of Emma's room made every hair on my body stand up. It was high-pitched, but clearly masculine, wrong in a way I couldn't articulate. Like someone who was trying to speak, but didn't quite remember how. Like something was broken in the mechanism that produced the sounds. Aren't they just so special? The words themselves were innocent, but the way they were delivered, the strange cadence, the off-pitch tone, made them sound grotesque. Made them sound dangerous. My eyes adjusted, and I could see him now. A figure standing next to Emma's bed. Extremely tall, maybe 6'4" or taller, towering in the small room. The light from the hallway caught parts of him, leaving others in shadow, creating a fragmented image that my brain struggled to piece together. He wasn't moving toward me, wasn't being aggressive. He was just standing there next to my niece's bed, in a room where he absolutely should not be. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, not to confront, not to engage, but to grab the kids and get out of this house as fast as possible. This wasn't a situation I could handle. This wasn't something that could be reasoned with or fought off. I turned and ran down the stairs, taking them two at a time, nearly tripping in my haste. I grabbed both kids by their arms. "Put your shoes on," I said, my voice tight with barely controlled panic. "We're leaving. Right now." Emma started crying harder, and I didn't understand why until I looked up. The man was at the balcony now, peering around the wall, looking down at us. And he was doing peekaboo, moving his hands in front of his face, covering and uncovering it in that game parents play with babies. But his face wasn't playful. It was wrong, distorted in a way that had nothing to do with the shadows or the distance. And he was smiling. "Forget the shoes," I said, grabbing both kids and pulling them toward the door. "We're going. Now." I didn't look back as we ran out of the house. Didn't check to see if he was following. Just ran with Emma and Lucas down the walkway, down the sidewalk, toward the neighbor's house a few doors down where I could see lights on inside. I rang the doorbell 5 times, holding both kids against me, my body positioned between them and my sister's house. The woman who answered knew Emma and Lucas immediately, saw the terror on their faces, and let us in without question. I stood on her front porch, phone pressed to my ear, speaking to the 911 operator while watching my sister's house with the intensity of someone expecting an explosion. And then I saw him, walking out of the house casually, like he was leaving work at the end of a normal day, walking down the path, down the sidewalk, disappearing into the darkness of the suburban street. The operator's voice was calm, professional, telling me not to engage, telling me officers were on their way. But I wanted to follow him. Every fiber of my being wanted to chase that man down the street, to make him answer for what he'd done, for the terror he'd caused. But I didn't know if he was armed. Didn't know if confronting him would put the kids in more danger. And something about his voice, that strange, high-pitched, broken way of speaking, suggested he might not be fully aware of what he was doing, might not understand the severity of his actions. So I stood there, watching him disappear down an intersecting street, giving the operator the street name, hoping desperately that the police would head in that direction, that they would catch him before he disappeared into one of the houses or into the night. But by the time the officers arrived, he was gone. They searched the neighborhood, checked my sister's house thoroughly, found no sign of forced entry, no indication of how he'd gotten in or where he'd gone. It was as if he'd simply materialized inside and then vanished back into the night. The police were professional, thorough, but I could see the frustration in their faces. No evidence. No leads. Just my testimony and the terrified accounts of two young children. After they finished their investigation, I drove Emma and Lucas to my parents' house. There was no way we were staying in that house that night. The kids fell asleep in the back seat on the way there, exhausted from fear and adrenaline. My sister and her husband came home early from a wedding. I had to explain what happened. Had to watch the color drain from my sister's face as I described the man standing in Emma's room. There was blame, unspoken but present, hanging in the air like smoke. This happened on your watch. On the one night you were responsible. But I knew deep in my bones that man had been in the house before I arrived. Just like the intruder at Charlie's house years before. He'd been there, hiding, waiting, watching us go through our evening routine, completely unaware of his presence. That should have been the end of it. A terrifying experience, a story to tell, a reason for my sister to install security cameras throughout her house. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Something I couldn't quite articulate. It was the way Emma and Lucas had described their first visits. The figure that looked like me, but wasn't quite right. The voice that sounded like mine, but was somehow wrong. Because that happened before I saw the man upstairs. That happened when, as far as I knew, I was alone in the house with two sleeping children. So what were they seeing? What was visiting them in their rooms? Wearing my face, speaking with a voice almost like mine. The police said it was the intruder. Obviously. He'd been moving through the house, and in the darkness, the kids had mistaken him for me. Simple. Logical. The kind of explanation that ties everything up neatly. But I'd seen the man. He was tall, easily 6'4". I'm 5'8". He was thin, angular. I'm average build. Even in darkness, even half asleep, there's no way Emma and Lucas would confuse him for me. So what were they seeing? In the days following the incident, I couldn't stop thinking about the timeline. Couldn't stop trying to piece together what had actually happened that night. I replayed every moment, every detail, looking for something I'd missed. Emma's first visit was around 9:30. She said I'd come to her room and whispered that everything was fine. But I'd been downstairs on the couch watching TV. I was certain of it. Completely, absolutely certain. 20 minutes later, Lucas came down saying I'd stood by his dresser and looked at him. Again, I'd been on the couch. Hadn't moved. Then Emma's second visit, the one where she was terrified, saying someone came to her room and said goodnight. But it didn't sound like me. That's when I went upstairs and found the man in her room. So if the man was in Emma's room when I found him, who or what had visited the kids earlier? What had they seen in their doorways, standing by dressers, whispering reassurances? I tried to discuss this with my sister, but she wasn't interested in theories or mysteries. She was interested in locks and cameras and alarm systems. She and her husband installed 6 cameras throughout the house, inside and out. Motion sensors on every door and window. A security system that would alert them the moment anything was amiss. I understood the impulse. After something like that, you want control. You want to believe that with enough technology, enough vigilance, you can prevent it from ever happening again. But cameras can only show you what's physically there. They can't capture feelings. Can't record that sense of wrongness that settles over a place like a heavy blanket. Can't explain why 2 children saw something that looked like their uncle but wasn't. I started researching similar experiences, diving into online forums and paranormal communities, looking for stories that matched what happened. And I found them. Dozens of them. Hundreds. People who'd been in their homes when family members saw them in completely different locations. Doppelgangers, some called them. Fetch or Vardager in different cultures. The phenomenon of seeing someone in a place they couldn't possibly be. Usually, these sightings were harmless, confusing, unsettling, but not dangerous. But sometimes, people reported that these appearances coincided with break-ins, with intruders, with real physical danger. As if something was trying to warn them, trying to get their attention, trying to make them understand that something was very wrong. The more I read, the more convinced I became that Emma and Lucas hadn't seen the intruder. They'd seen something else, something that was trying to alert us to the danger before it was too late. 3 months after the incident at my sister's house, I was at a friend's apartment for a party. Nothing unusual, Just people hanging out, drinking, talking, the normal social gathering of 20-somethings with nothing better to do on a Saturday night. I went to use the bathroom, and on my way back, I saw someone in the hallway. Just for a second, just a glimpse. But the way they moved, the way they carried themselves, it was familiar in a way that made my stomach drop. They turned a corner, and I followed, my heart starting to race for reasons I couldn't fully articulate. The hallway was empty when I rounded the corner. Just a long corridor with apartment doors on either side and a window at the far end. No one there. No one could have disappeared that quickly unless they'd gone into one of the apartments. But I hadn't heard any doors open or close. I stood there, trying to make sense of what I'd seen, when I noticed a friend of mine coming out of one of the apartments. "Did someone just come past here?" I asked. He looked at me confused. "You just walked past like a minute ago. You didn't see yourself." The floor felt unsteady beneath me. "That wasn't me. I've been in the bathroom." He laughed, thinking I was joking. But I wasn't joking. And judging by the expression on his face when he realized I was serious, he could tell I wasn't. We stood there in awkward silence for a moment, and then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Dude, you look really freaked out. Are you okay?" I wasn't okay, because I was starting to understand that what happened at my sister's house wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of something larger, something that followed me, or maybe something that I was somehow connected to. I left the party shortly after, made some excuse about not feeling well. As I walked to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that somewhere, in some way I couldn't detect, something was observing me. I started paying closer attention after that. Started noticing the small things. The way people sometimes did double takes when they saw me, as if they'd see me somewhere I hadn't been. The way my roommate once asked why I'd been standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning when I'd been asleep in my room. At first, I tried to rationalize it. People make mistakes. Memory is fallible. There are lots of people who look similar, but the incidents kept happening. And each time, I felt that same wrongness, that same sense that reality was bending around me in ways it shouldn't. I began to wonder if I was somehow creating these appearances, if my presence in a place, my existence, was causing ripples that manifested as these doppelganger sightings. Or if something was using me as a template, copying my appearance and movements for purposes I couldn't understand. The question that haunted me most was this. If these appearances were warnings, what were they warning me about? What danger was coming that required such impossible interventions? 6 months after my sister's house, my mother called me in the middle of the night. Her voice was tight with fear in a way I'd never heard before. "Someone's trying to break into the house," she said, her words coming fast. "Your father saw them in the backyard, and we called the police, but they said someone who looked exactly like you was standing in our driveway an hour ago. Were you here?" I hadn't been. I'd been at my apartment, asleep, 40 minutes away from my parents' house. The police arrived and found evidence of an attempted break-in at the back door. Someone had been trying to pry it open when my father spotted them, and they fled. The security camera my parents had installed showed a figure in the backyard, but their face was obscured. But an hour before that, the same camera had captured footage of someone standing in the driveway, looking directly at the camera. And my mother was right, it did look like me. Same height, same build, same general appearance. But I could prove I'd been at my apartment. My roommate confirmed I'd been home all evening. My phone's location data showed I'd never left. Yet there I was, on the camera, standing in my parents' driveway, looking up at their house, an hour before someone tried to break in. That's when I finally understood. These appearances weren't random. They weren't meaningless glitches in reality. They were warnings, signals. Something was using my image, my appearance, to alert people to danger. At my sister's house, Emma and Lucas saw me before I discovered the intruder. At my parents' house, the camera captured me before the break-in attempt. The pattern was clear once I stopped trying to rationalize it away. I don't know what this thing is. I don't know why it uses my face specifically, but I know it's trying to help. Trying to warn people when something dangerous is about to happen. The question is, why me? What is it about me, about my existence, that makes me the template for these warnings? And what happens when it appears somewhere and I don't understand the warning in time? I'm 25 now, and the appearances have continued. Not frequently, but regularly enough that I've learned to recognize the signs. People looking at me strangely, asking if I was somewhere I wasn't, describing seeing me in places I've never been. Each time, I've learned to pay attention, to ask questions, to investigate. And each time, I've found that something dangerous was happening or about to happen in that location. My sister still doesn't like talking about that night. The trauma of finding out a stranger had been in her house, standing over her daughter's bed, is something she's still processing. But Emma and Lucas remember. Emma especially. She's 10 now, and last year she asked me if I believed in guardian angels. I said I didn't know, that I'd never really thought about it. She told me she thinks I have one. One that looks like me and shows up when people are in danger. The simplicity of her explanation struck me. A guardian angel. Something benevolent, protective, that uses my appearance because, why? Because I'm connected to the people it's trying to protect? Because I'm somehow a conduit for its interventions? I don't have answers. Just patterns. Just a growing collection of incidents where my doppelganger appeared before something bad happened, giving people just enough warning to protect themselves or get help. The man who broke into my sister's house was never caught. He disappeared that night and was never identified. But I think about him sometimes. About his strange voice, his disturbing behavior. About the way he stood in Emma's room saying, "Aren't they just so special?" Was he planning to hurt them? Was my doppelganger's early appearances what alerted Emma and Lucas? What made them call for me before he could do whatever he was planning? I'll never know for certain. But here's what I do know. Something is watching out for the people I care about. Something that wears my face and speaks with a voice almost like mine. Something that operates by rules I don't understand, but that seems fundamentally benevolent. The police never believed my theories about the doppelganger. My sister thinks I'm coping with trauma through elaborate rationalizations. My friends think I'm being dramatic when I try to explain it. But the appearances keep happening, and people keep being warned, and lives keep being saved. I've stopped trying to understand why me. Stopped trying to figure out the mechanics of how something can appear in multiple places, how it can create these impossible situations. Instead, I've learned to be grateful. Because somewhere out there, moving through reality in ways that break every rule I thought I understood, is something that looks like me. Something that shows up when danger is near, that warns people, that gives them the chance to save themselves. Some people have guardian angels. I have a guardian doppelganger. And honestly, I think I'm okay with that. The night at my sister's house taught me that the world is far stranger than we pretend it is. That the boundaries between possible and impossible are more porous than we admit. That sometimes protection comes from the most unexpected sources. So if you ever see someone who looks familiar but feels wrong, who appears in places they shouldn't be, who speaks with a voice that's almost right but not quite, don't dismiss it. Pay attention, because it might not be a threat. It might be a warning. And it might be the only chance you get to protect yourself from what's coming.